Okay, so we're gonna see the liver disorders today. Here you have the objectives for the lecture of today. I split this in a couple of videos and we will finish in streaming. So here you have the layout. First we're gonna go for cholestasis. So we'll do a short review of how bile is produced and what is cholestasis. And then in the second video we will go through hepatitis. Alright, so as you know, the liver has a double blood supply. The hepatic artery that is coming from the celiac trunk, we saw that in Human Structure and Function 1, and that supplies about 300 milliliters per minute. And then we have the portal vein coming from the digestive system that supplies about a liter per minute. So this means that, for example, for a woman having 4 liters of blood, all the blood in the body goes to the liver every 3 minutes. Okay, so, and this is because the liver has many functions, like producing bile necessary for digestion of fats and also for fat-soluble vitamins. It also metabolizes hormones or drugs, so they get deactivated. It synthesizes proteins, glucose, clothing factors, stores vitamins and minerals, converts ammonia into urea for its excretion, and converts fatty acids into ketone bodies. That we will come to this again with the lecture on diabetes. So the end products metabolized by the liver are the ones that are used to make bile. So in this figure, just as a reminder, you can see how the functional cells of the liver are organized around the triad of vessels inside the liver. You can see the hepatocytes forming cords. These cells produce and secrete the bile into canaliculi, which drain into the bile ducts. The bile is then stored in the gallbladder until needed for digestion. So bile salts produced by the liver help in the absorption of fats and fat-soluble vitamins. Most of the bile salts are reabsorbed and the rest are eliminated with the stools together with the excess cholesterol and other products that can't be filtered by the kidneys. Most of bile salts are reabsorbed in the intestine and return that way to the portal system that take them back into the liver, and then a new cycle begins. So it's reutilized constantly. But where the main product to make bile comes from? Okay, so you know that erythrocytes, those are the red cells of the blood, have a mean life of 120 days. So when they are that old and they are forced to go through the spleen, their membranes break and the Heme portion of the hemoglobin is oxidized to biliverdin and then converted into bilirubin that attaches to the plasma albumin, which is the most common protein in the plasma, and is transported to the liver through the portal vein. Then hepatocytes convert bilirubin into conjugated bilirubin that is then soluble in bile and can be excreted into the small intestine. So, and there, intestinal flora converts half of the bile into the another component called urobilinogen that can be also reabsorbed or excreted. All right, so everything flows perfectly well until there is a problem that interferes with all this system. When there isn't enough bile flowing, we can say that there's some sort of cholestasis going on, because chole means bile and stasis means inactivity. In this situation, it is logic that everything used to make the bile, like bilirubin or cholesterol or the bile acids themselves, they may accumulate in the blood, and they can be detected through a blood test. So this reduction in bile flow can basically be split into two types: hepatocellular cholestasis, or intrinsic, where for some reason the hepatocytes aren't making enough bile, and obstructive cholestasis, where something physically is blocking the bile flow. So we can call that also extrahepatic. Okay, so hepatocellular cholestasis, what we have now in the slide, is strongly associated to the hormone estrogen. Okay, so estrogen inhibits the export pump of the hepatocytes that pump out the bile acids, usually in the form of cholic acid, which is produced when hepatocytes break down cholesterol. Since the production and secretion of bile acids is a major driving force for the synthesis of bile in the hepatocytes, when the cells can't transport the bile acids, this build up inside the cells, and this basically is a signal to downregulate bile acid synthesis and excretion of bile altogether, which decreases the total amount of bile production, right? When excretion of bile components like conjugated bilirubin are down, but they are still being conjugated, they also build up along with the bile acids and eventually are excreted into the interstitial space, where they can access the blood supply. So we will see hepatocellular cholestasis in situations where estrogens are high, right? Since oral contraceptive pills use estrogen and progesterone to stop ovulation, it makes sense that they've been linked to developing of cholestasis. In a similar way, during pregnancy, estrogen levels can increase a lot, which can lead to pregnancy-induced cholestasis. Unfortunately, this can be a dangerous situation for the fetus, because maternal bile acid can cross the placenta and build up in the fetal compartment. Okay, the other major cholestasis is, other major type of cholestasis is obstructive, which usually happens outside the liver, so it's called also extrahepatic, right? Now, this is usually a physical blockage of the common bile duct, and there are some common causes. It could be like a gallstone that came from the gallbladder, or it could be from a disease called primary sclerosing cholangitis, where the body's immune system is attacking the bile ducts and cause an inflammation and a scar tissue built up, which in turn can make it more difficult for the bile to flow through them. Whatever the reason, the result is that bile accumulates in the liver, and the pressure in the bile ducts increases, because the liver is producing bile, but it can go through, and this can cause pain to the patient. If the obstruction continues, the bile will leak between the hepatocytes and reach the interstitial space and the blood, where it can be measured, it can be detected. Alright, this build-up of bile will be pretty obvious on histology of the liver. So if you do a biopsy, you'll see it, okay? But it's not necessary. You may detect it with a blood test. And in this case, it will look like these bile lakes or bile infarcts, which are these pools of yellowish green bile that has made their way into the interstitial space. You can see it in the picture there, the yellow dots, all right? If the obstruction is not relieved, portal tract fibrosis results and may finally cause biliary cirrhosis, which we will go through cirrhosis later on. All right, perfect. Now, a pretty common clinical finding of somebody with either hepatocellular or obstructive cholestasis is jaundice and also pruritus. Conjugated bilirubin will get into the blood, leading to the yellow skin tone that is indicative of jaundice. And cholesterol can also deposit in the skin and lead to these build-ups that we call xanthomas. You also might expect a reduction in nutrient absorption from the small intestine, since bile usually helps emulsify fats, which makes them easier to absorb. Also, when bile gets into the small intestine, some of the conjugated bilirubin is converted by microbes in the gut to urobilinogen, which can get reduced to stercobilin, which gives the stools their characteristic brown color. So, if less bile and conjugated bilirubin is making it to the gut, then the stools will likely take a much lighter color because it will have less stercobilin. A fraction of the urobilinogen is reabsorbed and gets excreted in the urine after being converted to yellow urobilin. So there will be less in the urine as well. This is why the urine normally is yellow. Okay, so in this case, conjugated bilirubin excretion will increase in the urine since it's being removed from the blood through the kidneys, what we called bilirubinuria. Okay, that means bilirubin in the urine, and will cause the urine to be darker. Finally, enzymes that are usually found in the liver, like alkaline phosphatase and gamma-glutamyl transpeptidase, may also be increased in the blood, both of which are membrane-bound enzymes that are sensitive to hepatocyte damage and can be released when hepatocytes are damaged or stressed in some way. So you will find that in the blood, which is not the normal thing to happen. As mentioned before, jaundice will develop here. This is the medical term for yellowish discoloration of the skin when the serum bilirubin builds up above 2 to 2.5 milligrams deciliter. There are 4 major causes for jaundice, and these are an excessive destruction of erythrocytes for any cause, an impaired uptake of bilirubin by hepatocytes, a decreased conjugation of bilirubin, and what we are just talking about, which is obstruction of the bile flow. In all these situations, bilirubin will increase in blood either because an excess is produced or due to failure to remove it from the blood. All right, so this is all for cholestasis. Let's move to hepatitis now.